Let's talk about autistic special interests and why I gave up on one of mine. So first of all, this video is not demonizing special interests or telling anyone to quit them. It's about how I personally experienced my special interests as an autistic person and some of the patterns I've noticed in me and other autistic people. So there was a specific hobby that I had when I was younger, but I found it painful to revisit later in life. But before I get to my story, I want to do a deep dive on autistic special interests as a whole, because I feel like they can be misunderstood, and I also want to provide some important emotional context to my story. Also, if you see me like it looks like I'm reading something, I have a script because autism. I wrote this out beforehand. I'm better with writing than I am with talking. So for those who don't know, special interest is a term coined by autistic people and the neurodivergent community to describe very intense fixations and topics and hobbies that we might be passionate about, often more so than the average person. If you've ever heard the diagnostic criteria for autism, special interests are technically in there, they're just worded differently. One of the criteria for diagnosing autism is restricted, repetitive patterns of behavior, interest, or activities. Under this criteria is more specifics, including highly restricted, fixated interests that are abnormal in intensity and focus, aka special interests, just worded with a dash of pathologizing. Autistic people's interests are often so intense that they can be intrinsically interwoven into our emotions and our memories and how we perceive the world. They're like the very ground that we stand on, and we need them like we need food and water to live. Very often, our special interests are used as self-regulation of sorts. Now imagine you're autistic in a world full of non-autistic people who don't understand you and you don't understand them, and the sensory environment is chaotic and overwhelming. It just makes sense to hyper-focus on a hobby in order to cope with everything. Even neurotypical people do this to an extent. Hobbies can be a great way to unwind after a long day of work or to just take your mind off the stressors of life. I think what sets apart autistic special interests and neurotypical interests is the intensity. Autistic people may spend vast amounts of time engaging in their special interests. They may also become experts on their interests, like knowing every piece of trivia about a TV show they like, way more than the average person would. So aside from intensity, sometimes autistic special interests can be really obscure and specific. I'll use one of mine as an example. I really like Dollar Tree, as in the dollar stores in the US where everything is supposedly $1. Now it's $1.25, but that's besides the point. So I weirdly enjoy going into Dollar Trees frequently just to see what they have and to figure out what genuinely useful items that you can find there, which is surprisingly a lot of things. For a while, I was specifically collecting fuzzy socks from Dollar Tree. I'd get at least 2 or 3 of each design that I liked, and I ended up having way too many and I had to get rid of some, sadly. I should also note that for an autistic person's interest to be called a special interest, it doesn't necessarily have to be super obscure or specific. It's actually pretty common for autistic people to share similar interests with their peers, especially girls on the spectrum, which I think is one contributor to girls flying under the radar, because it's normal, for example, to like Barbies and boy bands and stuff. The difference just might be the intensity of interest. Autistic people also don't have to have the same interests for their whole lives for those to be considered special interests. For me, I know I have a few broad special interests like film and media and like general creative stuff, but I also have a revolving door of more specific interests that I pick up and I put down later. And sometimes I might go back to my old interests or just discard them entirely. I was really into pirates as a teenager, and while I still kind of like pirates, I don't really have an intense and all-encompassing interest in them anymore. I also tend to have a favorite TV show or movie for a while before switching to new ones later on. It's also fun to rewatch old stuff and get a new perspective on it after growing and changing as a person, which I think a lot of people can relate to even if you're not autistic. Special interests can also be really useful, like they can help autistic people make sense of the world. A great example of this is Owen Suskind, an autistic guy who as a child learned to communicate through his interest in Disney movies. His parents would use dialogue from Disney movies in order to communicate with him. So there's a great film on Owen Suskind that I highly recommend. It's called Life Animated. It's somewhere on YouTube. It's a bit dated, but it's a really beautiful representation of how an autistic person's special interest can hold so much meaning for them and how they can harness that to lead a life that suits who they really are. So I'm going to leave a link to that in the description if you would like to watch. So I find that these interests can be interwoven into our daily lives and how we perceive things and how we move through the world. I remember when I was a kid, I would be fixated on the structure of gameplay in video games. I really liked that feeling of accomplishment that I would get from playing games, and I tried to emulate that in my real life. I would imagine myself as a video game character, like moving around and completing certain tasks for points and seeing the world around me as a video game world and not the real world. And I think that made reality easier for me to process. It's almost like it kind of smoothed over the rough edges of a world that's too detailed and chaotic and overwhelming. Wouldn't that be nice if real life had Nintendo 64 graphics? So this was back when Nintendo 64 and GameCube were the most advanced game consoles. So the graphics were definitely nowhere near as sharp as current game graphics, and definitely not as sharp as reality. So even to this day, I find simple game graphics to be much easier on my brain than detailed graphics. So that's why I play a lot of retro games. But yeah, I would run around my yard, almost imitating like the running animations that some video game characters would have. And I would feel like I am a video game character in a video game. And that would make me feel confident and enjoy whatever I'm doing a lot more than I originally would have. I would also fixate on specific movements and expressions of cartoon characters that I liked. When having conversations with other people, I would imagine me or the other person as whatever character I was most recently fixating on. An example would be Guybrush Threepwood from the Monkey Island game series. And this was back when I was really into pirates. If I was recently playing, say, Monkey Island 4 or Escape to Monkey Island, which was the first 3D Monkey Island game. If I am talking to a friend after recently playing this game, I might imagine me as Guybrush doing a very specific animation that he frequently did in that game during dialogue. So I would be like, I'm going to try to show you gotta put my mic down. Okay. So to kind of show you, like out loud, I could be saying something like, I totally agree with you. And in my mind, I'd be like, I totally agree with you, which is this very specific like gesture that Guybrush would do in that game. So I would not be physically doing this. I would just be imagining me doing this in my head. So the characters could be anyone from Guybrush Threepwood to a specific character from a TV show or a movie to maybe even an anime character that I randomly found on a Google image search and downloaded the image because I like it and it's aesthetically pleasing. I got a whole folder that's just full of random anime characters that I found from Google Images. So this phenomenon still kind of happens to me when I'm talking to people, and it's kind of entertaining, if anything. So special interest can be tainted by a negative experience, like being bullied or mocked for having that interest, or a friend just not liking it, or not getting it, or not sharing the intensity of passion that you have about it. A real life example of this is when I had a friend who was really into music, and they kind of used music to communicate their feelings with me. And I like music too, but sometimes I wouldn't quite understand their specific way that they liked music. Sometimes I would understand the message and I would appreciate the song in the similar way that they did, but other times it kind of just missed the mark, like I wouldn't get it, and this would upset him and make him feel misunderstood. And it seems common knowledge that you can't expect someone to feel the same way that you do about things, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't hurt when you feel misunderstood or unappreciated in some way. And this definitely applies to autistic people and their relationships to their special interests. It can often be a very lonely and isolating thing. It can also be risky to share your special interests for multiple reasons. Like, let's say both you and your significant other share an interest in Pokemon. It's part of your routine to play Pokemon and to gush about all the Pokemon lore together. And this can be an incredible way to bond. But what happens if that relationship relationship fails and you break up and you go no contact. It not only disrupts your normal routine because you won't have that person around to play Pokemon with you anymore, it could also ruin your relationship to Pokemon as a whole. You might feel upset anytime you try to engage with that interest again because it makes you think of that person that you lost and the arguments that you had and the good times and the bad times, and it can just be emotionally way too much to handle. I know for me, I've had to work through baggage around specific interests due to bad experiences relating to those interests. And even now, I find it difficult to share my special interests, especially info dumping, because I don't want to ruin it for me. I found a Reddit thread of autistic people kind of sharing similar experiences, so I'm going to read just 2 of these posts here. I was bullied a lot when I was younger, and my interests were always picked on. Not talking about things I care about is definitely a safety thing for me. You can't mock me for caring about something if you don't know what I like. I probably come across as very boring at times because of it. And the second one, I feel the same way. I've had a lot of anxiety about sharing my interests. I get so attached to my interests that they feel like a part of my identity, and it feels like I'm giving away a piece of myself if I share them. I think it's also because I'm autistic and ADHD, and my interests change a lot. I hate telling people that I'm not into something anymore, so it's easier to just not talk about interests in the first place. So for me, I perceive disinterest or criticism of one of my interests as a rejection of me as a person, and I would feel shame about the interest and want to hide it. For example, you know how when you hyper-focus on a song and you listen to it over and over because you just like it so much? I shared one of those songs with a friend and they didn't like it. It just wasn't their kind of music, which you think in most cases is just a totally benign and normal interaction. And he was really polite about it too. There was nothing really wrong with that. But for me, in that moment, I just felt my heart sink. I felt ashamed for liking the song so much, and I thought that because my friend didn't like it, that must mean that it's objectively bad and I shouldn't like it either. So I'm aware that this is a totally irrational thought process, but I think this might be common among autistic people. If you experience this, let me know in the comments. I'm genuinely curious if anyone can relate to this. Self-regulation. Okay, now we can talk about my specific special interests that I gave up on. When I was around 17 years old, I discovered the mass multiplayer online game called Pirates of the Caribbean Online, also known as just Pirates Online. I originally tried it out because my special interest at that time was pirates, and more specifically Pirates of the Caribbean, and the Monkey Island games, as I mentioned earlier, but that's irrelevant. But I found myself also loving the social aspects of the game. I was very socially isolated at that point. I was homeschooled. I didn't really have friends that I saw on a regular basis in person, so I relied a lot on the internet to socialize and make friends. I actually found a diary entry from that time, and according to that, I hadn't socialized for months by the time I started playing Pirates Online. So yeah, I was pretty isolated. And well, I still am, but not nearly as much. I quickly made friends in the game and we formed a guild. We went on quests together, and one of the players named Captain Dreadlock helped me with leveling up. Dreadlock was a higher level than me, and I was attached to him in particular because he was just nice to me. And I was a bit emotionally neglected, so it was a match made in heaven, I guess. He was like my best friend at the time, for the period of time that I did play Pirates Online. So back then, and even now to some degree, I had kind of an anxious attachment style. I would fixate on a particular person and cling to them and want their attention all the time. And Dreadlock was his favorite person for me at that time. I would crave his validation, his kindness, and I would get anxious if he didn't respond right away. And every day, I would just look forward to seeing Dreadlock the next time I played the game. So, funny story, there was a period of silence in one of our conversations, and I remember this because I wrote it down in a journal. There was a period of silence in one of our conversations, and I was spamming the chat because I thought he was unalived. He just disappeared into the ether. I'm like, where are you? Come back. Tell me you're alive. So yeah, I was very anxious at the time. So what exactly happened with Pirates Online? I don't recall exactly what led to this, but at some point I just stopped playing Pirates Online. It could have been due to the game being shut down, or life getting busy, or Dreadlock quitting the game or just me feeling emotionally exhausted from all my social anxiety. Honestly, there are a lot of things I don't remember from that time, including how or why I stopped playing Pirates Online. All I know is that I stopped playing at some point and I hadn't touched it for years after that. I wouldn't have been able to play it anyway because the game shut down in 2013. But the game was so beloved by some of the fan base that it was recreated and released in 2017 as The Legend of Pirates Online. It's still available to play today, and they've been expanding even beyond the base content, so there's a lot to do in it, and it's fun, and honestly, I recommend it. It's also 100% free. Free! There's no in-game transactions or anything. It's too old to justify having that. Naturally, when I discovered the re-release, I definitely wanted to try it out. I was a bit late to the party. I think I only started playing it again around 2020, but you know, perfect timing, I guess, considering we were all socially isolated at that point. And it's weirdly fitting because social isolation is what led me to playing the original game back in the day. So there was only one complication. Pirates Online was a PTSD trigger for me. Starting in my mid-20s, my complex PTSD made a lot of childhood memories and special interests painful to try to revisit. Whenever I would think about those special interests or try to engage with them, I would dissociate. So I learned very quickly to avoid those interests and those memories at all costs. This was honestly devastating to me because most of my life up until that point, I had always cherished these memories. Still, a lot of time had passed since I last played Pirates Online, so I felt ready to give it another try. I downloaded the game, and it was just like I remembered. It was nice, but kind of bittersweet to revisit. The last time I played was during one of the most lonely and difficult times in my life. Memories of the feelings from that time cropped up while I was playing, and it was rather painful. Thankfully, though, I had worked on my mental health enough at this point that I felt equipped to deal with it. So as I played, I gradually processed these feelings. As I socialized in the game and made new friends, I worked through the difficult feelings I had associated with that social experience. I kind of mourned what I had been through, while also accepting that things are different now and I can move on. It wasn't an entirely linear process, as healing often is, but playing this game again in a weird way was like a kind of exposure therapy. By playing again, I was able to relive the trauma, but actually process what happened and respond differently this time. And because of that, I was able to fully enjoy the game again without any baggage attached. I needed to re-experience these feelings and associations in order to unlock that part of my brain that was previously too painful to touch. As a happy side effect, this experience opened the door for me to access other childhood memories and interests that I had previously avoided like the plague. So I feel like I've reclaimed a lost part of my childhood. I got some of my childlike joy back when I thought it was lost forever. So what can we learn from all this? Well, first, I should say, please don't throw yourself into exposure therapy of any kind. If you have serious trauma or issues around your interests, approach it with caution. Give it a lot of thought. Maybe start with talk therapy if you have access to that, or talk to a friend or someone you trust. Exposure therapy can backfire if you're not ready for it. That being said, it is okay to take baby steps. If you're dealing with trauma around special interests, it might take a while to work through. Healing doesn't happen overnight, at least not in most cases. Also, working on boundaries between your interests and other people might help a bit. For me, that meant not info dumping on anyone that I don't know very well in case they might have a negative reaction, which in turn would make me feel ashamed for having that interest. One autistic person on Reddit says, "I tend not to talk about my special interests in general anymore because I've been mocked and harassed for them in the past. I only really talk about them within communities dedicated to them and with my close friends who are interested in them too." I think this is actually good advice. If you engage with or talk about your special interests in communities that share that interest, or only with people that you trust, that can help reduce the possibility of being bullied for those interests. It's totally okay to protect yourself. You're not too sensitive or whatever. Like, this is just how our brains are wired, and that's okay. And setting boundaries is very necessary because as much as I would love to give everyone the benefit of the doubt, people are messy and complicated, and there is a real risk of being hurt or bullied or taken advantage of in some way. To leave on a positive note, know that whatever your special interests are, it is okay to have them. It's okay to be genuinely excited about the things that you love, and people's reactions to them say more about that person than they say about you or the interests themselves. So love what you love. It is okay. It's not cringe or weird or whatever, and even if it was, who cares? You love it. That's the important thing. Speaking of special interests, I want to embrace more of mine on this channel. I honestly have felt obligated to make content on autism and mental health stuff because that's what initially drew people to my channel, and I am interested in this topic, but it's kind of wearing me down a little bit having to be so talky, let alone discuss such heavy topics. It's been difficult. So moving forward, while I'll still talk about some of these topics, I think I want to do more fun, creative, silly things. I used to post free stock footage, and I might get back to doing that again. I've also been learning basic animation, and I think it'd be fun to make short animations and upload them here. In fact, I've already made one. I've already uploaded it by the time you're seeing this, so check the link in the description if you want to watch it. It's hilarious. I'm curious, what do you think? Do you want to see short animations on my channel? Let me know in the comments. And if you want to support what I do, I have a Patreon, or you can become a member on my YouTube channel for only $1 to access all of the members only content and live streams. That's all I got for you. Thanks for watching. Bye. You won't. Oh my goodness. I'm gross. I'm a real man now. Okay.